And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the New England Antique Racers. My name is Al Feeney, and I'm very proud to serve as president of the group. I welcome the Hall of Fame members, the award presenters, and all the guests. I want to start off by reading a letter from Pete Hamilton that I received by overnight mail a few days ago. Dear Al, thank you very much for once again inviting me to the induction ceremony for the New England Antique Racers Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend this year. I will really miss seeing my old friends being welcomed into this fine fellowship. Please extend my congratulations and best wishes to all of them. Last year's banquet and my induction was one of the happiest moments of my life. Many thanks again to you and to the members for making it such a memorable experience. Obviously, Pete's not going to be with us tonight, but I think this letter conveys a lot of emotion. Last year, putting this program together was our first induction ceremony. It occurred on February 1st of last year, which is like a week from now. And we worked hard. We planned hard for this event, and we wanted to put some. We wanted to make it a significant, memorable event. And we were approached and contacted Jackie Arute to be the master of ceremonies, and we hoped that he would be with us. The minute we contacted him and explained to him what we were doing, he took over with great excitement, great enthusiasm. He said this was something he'd long waited for. He wondered when anyone was going to do it. He was incredibly helpful. We were amateurs at this. We still are amateurs. It was his advice and guidance. He came to the program. He set up the program meetings. He told us what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And it was a very successful event. He introduced us to some prominent people that came along and helped us along the way. And as you know, that was remarkably successful. Those of you who attended, the videotape plays out in the hall. Unfortunately, we had to change our date schedule because we didn't want to conflict with the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, the IRL race down in Orlando didn't change it, so Jackie is working for ABC Sports this weekend in Orlando, Florida, covering that event, so he is not here. Bones Borsier also is in Orlando. He was part of our program last year. He sends his regrets. He misses not being here also. During the last week of last year's program, things got very hectic. We were very excited, but we had originally had Mike Stefanik was originally supposed to present two of the awards. We got word that he was had an opportunity to test a Craftsman's truck, and he wasn't going to be able to attain. We didn't know who we were going to put in the slots. I think on Wednesday night on my machine, which I came to work Thursday morning, it was a nice message. It says, "Hi, Al, Mike Joy calling. I find out I'm going to be in town for the weekend. Anything you want me to do, I'd like to be part of your program. I can be happy to collect tickets, sweep floors, wash dishes, anything you need." I couldn't wait for 10 o'clock to call him because I didn't want to call him too early. I thought maybe he wasn't an early riser like I am. And I said, "Mike is perfect." I said, "We have a gap in the presenters." I said, "You can certainly pitch in." Those of you who were here last year, you know how much Mike stepped forward helped out with the presenting. He became Jackie's assistant. They did the Bill Welch presentation together. It was a very emotional experience. It was a very, very good group. This year, when we asked Mike early if he would be a participant, he said, of course, pending his CBS schedule. It worked out well. Obviously, Jackie's not here. Mike is going to assume the full controls of master ceremonies, and that's wonderful. So without further ado, there's nothing more to say. This is a man we all know. He started here, a young man at Stafford Springs Motor Speedway at Riverside. A lot of us started there. He just went in a different direction. Most of us went in the direction of the cars. He went up, sat in the top booth because he got a better view of everything, and he kept clean. He was able to keep his clothes clean, but he went on to probably, to greater success than most of us. CBS Sports, TNN, TBS. One of my fondest memories is of Mike in 1992 when Richard Petty's farewell tour, the Alabama gang had a closed concert at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, Georgia, and we went down because we wanted to be we wanted to be there for Richard Petty's last race, and Mike got us the tickets because it was a closed event, and Mike, and I still have the tape, and I watch it occasionally, Mike Joy and Katie Haas announcing the Alabama, the Brugge, Alabama at the Richard Petty group, and that was just a fantastic experience, but that just shows Mike's versatility, a young man from our area, from Riverside Park, to Stafford Springs, to all the other tracks in between, to all of a sudden become the CBS voice of the Daytona 500, Mr. Mike Joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Al, and hi, everybody. It's really refreshing to do a banquet where I don't have to maintain a list of 127 official sponsors of the event and have to worry about $12 million in checks that have to be given out in one direction or another. So this is really kind of nice. When I was up here last year, I recall telling you how much I believed in this Hall of Fame and that we'd find a way to help it, and we did. My partner John Holland and I, through Sunoco Race Fuel, we've been very fortunate to have every modified tour winner for the last 2 years running our gasoline. We've come out with commemorative shirts for both the 97 and the 98 season. This is the new one. It's available in t-shirt and sweatshirt, and there's order forms by the door. And the reason I tell you all this is that we make a donation for each shirt sold to the New England Antique Racers Hall of Fame. So this shirt has to go to Dick Bergeron to be to adorn some nubile young Twinkie for Stock Car Racing magazine. The giving of the shirt is the last I have to do with that part of the project, but I do have a check for Al, and wish you folks continued best wishes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
It's such a great help. It's just unbelievable support.
This is a real treat for me, as it was last year, to come up here and spend a day reminiscing with folks whose memory of racing is a lot longer than mine, and to get to see a lot of the fellas I knew as heroes come up here on stage and be rewarded for a career at the time that had probably more hard knocks than it did rewards. It was the days when, as one of my colleagues has said, the drivers were fat and the tires were skinny. Or maybe they are now, I don't know. It was a day when race cars were laid out not on computers, but in chalk on the floor of the garage and welded from there. And that every car owner brought with him the best of his backyard art and the best of the expertise of himself and his crew. And a driver who perhaps had nerve as the most important of his skills to guide it around the racetracks of the Northeast. I'd like, because I know some of you have been sitting for a long time, just to kind of gauge the crowd for all of us here, would everyone who either raced or attended an auto race here at Eastern States Exposition please stand up for a second? Now that's a pretty good cross-sampling of New England auto racing. Thanks. Booker, your heat is going off at about 4:30. I'm glad you're here. Okay, fair is fair. So would everyone who, prior to being invited to this dinner this year or last year, never knew there was a track at Eastern States Exposition, please stand up for a second? Oh, you're all too modest, but I know there are a few. Of the folks who were inducted last year, I know several are with us this evening, and I'd like to ask them to stand. We honored them a year ago, and we want them to know how fondly we think of them still and always will. Renee Charland, Bill Slater, Ronnie Bouchard, and Bugsy Stevens. Would you stand up, please? We have a little unfinished business from last year. One of our scheduled inductees was unable to attend at that time, but we're very proud of his being with us tonight. NESMRA, the New England Supermodified Racing Association, is an organization that's well known from New England through New York State and all the way down to a whole bunch of racetracks in Florida, some of whom, until I drove up to the front gate, I didn't know were racetracks. I think one at Vero Beach was a gravel path around a cemetery, as I recall. And probably still is. The CEO of NESMRA and the fellow who guided it, and more importantly kept the books and made sure everybody got paid, is Ken Smith, and Ken's with us tonight. But the spark plug of NESMRA was the fellow who got the word out and let everybody in New England and the world know what great racers these super modified shoes were. He's been a sports editor, a hockey biographer, and a best friend to a lot of folks in racing. It's my pleasure to introduce Russ Conway.
Thank you, Mike. I remember Mike Joy with us in Florida. I think that road was by a cemetery, if I'm not mistaken. We were doing a little promotion and went by and kind of waved during the funeral, right? Something like that. Unfinished business, and oh, what a privilege this is. We knew back in the early 1960s and throughout the 1970s that we had a very special driver in our midst. To us, with Nesmra, Ollie Silva was more than a champion, quiet and unassuming off the racetrack. He let his racing do his talking for him. He was our Bobby Orr, our Ted Williams. What made many of Ollie's hundreds of wins so special is that many of them came away from his home track at Star Speedway or at the Old Pine Speedway in Groveland. Ollie never had a big-time sponsor. He built many of his own race cars himself. He maintained them, set them up, raced them, repaired them. He won in other people's backyards, from Florida to California, Ohio, to Quebec and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and throughout New England, against the best in super modifieds, late models, sprint cars, and the old coupes. He was a master traffic driver, arms always in motion. His rear to the front of the pack charges were electrifying. There are many memories of the Big O. Dick Berggren called him Dynamite Ollie. Others called him Quicksilver. Still others raced against him and just shook their head in disbelief. If there is a legacy left by these great drivers being honored by the New England Antique Racers as Hall of Famers, including Ollie, is that they never, ever let the fans down. A year ago, unfortunately, Ollie was hospitalized with a severe sugar diabetes ailment and unable to be here to be recognized as one of the true gentlemen and legends of this sport. As great a champion as he was for 32 years, he never quit until he was forced to. And I can assure you that he was thrilled to be honored as a Hall of Famer. Just like the days of his determination when he'd work his way back again, when he'd work on a car if it got wrecked. Ollie spent 4 months in the hospital last year, but he was always smiling when he was reminded about that Hall of Fame induction and he looked at the plaque. Today, in true Ollie Silva spirit, we get a chance to let Ollie know how good he really was. Here today to personally accept his Hall of Fame jacket and actually see his Hall of Fame plaque go on the wall. One more trip for Victory Lane. Welcome with me, Ollie Silva.
You have a special jacket for Ollie Silva? There you go. Wear it with pride.
I'll never forget a day at Thompson Speedway when I was fairly new to this sport, and a driver who had just been beaten by Dynamite Ollie Silva walked over to this, I'll call it a super modified because that's what Ken and Russ called it, but it was a Model A frame with one front frame horn pointing here and the other one pointing at the sky, and a Cleary front end, and some sheet metal hung somewhere, and this fellow just stood there, put his hands on his hips and goes, how can he be so fast in something like that? And I always marveled at it because I had never met someone who was such an explosive, aggressive man behind the wheel and such a kind and gentle man away from it. I've met a lot of people like that in the 30 years since, but none like Ollie. We're glad he's here today. Now, when there's a crash in the corner, those of you sitting closest to the fence must retain your seats so the people in back can see. How many times do we have to tell you this? For 30 years. Gosh, it's just, I don't understand it. Why do we sell seats at the racetrack? Francis, why do you keep building seats? These people stand up all night. I don't know if it's the beer or what, but they just won't sit down. You know, it's only been about 5 years since your local paper, unless you're very fortunate to live in a couple of pockets of New England, paid any real attention to auto racing. And some of them, I think, only did it when USA Today started carrying the results of all the national series. When I grew up, the two in Hartford area, the two main papers were the Current and the Times. And the Current would only cover auto racing when there was a spectacular fiery crash, in which case it would get a huge picture on the front of the sports section and you'd never find out who won. But we did have the Hartford Times. And at the Hartford Times we had Pete Zanardi, who was the auto racing writer, and he was the Grantland Rice of our sport because he put a face to all those names in the results columns, and he made us care about the people who drove and the people who raced. The Hartford Times is long gone, but fortunately Peter's been able to ply his trade at other newspapers and magazines that regularly cover the sport, and he's done a bit of writing for some of our speedways as well. Our next presenter is Pete Zanardi.
Does that have to stay there? You know, I came to this sport as a teenager going to New London, Waterford Speed Bowl. And I came as a guy who grew up in an Italian family that had this reverence for baseball. And I needed a little something to kind of get away from that conservatism. Well, I found it. I found a sport that had a guy named Red Foot driving a car number J2. Now, that's a combination you can kind of get your whole being around, you know, a lot of color. I mean, I can remember he had a little red foot, you know, a foot painted on the side of his helmet. And he won, and he won, and he won some more. And I remember that the race paper was always filled with this impish grin of this guy doing a lot of winning. And it seems sort of ironic that 40 years later, I'm here inducting Melvin Red Foot into the Near Hall of Fame. And lots of history has been made in those 4 decades, and history, of course, is why we're here. This Hall of Fame, like all the others, honors men who have shaped history. You can honor, I think, that is the definition of fame, what we do with history. And Red Foot shaped history. He was a United stock car superstar. And history will tell you that this guy won a lot of races at a lot of places. But if you believe, as I do, if you look at history as a continuum, you best linger a little bit when you come to an era called the Eastern Bandits. Because this group, which kind of existed in the 1960s, I believed, pulled New England racing out of this parochial little existence into the national picture. And to quote one of America's great politicians, you can look that up. And it was Norwood Arena that started it. and I'm sure some of us, even those that don't remember West Springfield Speedway, probably remember Trenton. Trenton was kind of the collecting point, the North and the South getting together. But the Bandits took this battle right into the den of the enemy. They went down south. And who was the first Yankee to win at Martinsville Speedway? Red Foot, 1961. Foot today joins two other bandits in the Hall of Fame, the late Ed Flemke and the always quiet Rennie Charland. In fact, Red was so successful down south that he eventually moved down there. And there's something else I owe Red Foot and the Bandits. I've always been infatuated with American names, with how strange they are. And it was those guys that made me aware of places like Belmar, New Jersey, Manassas, Virginia, Caraway, and always one of my favorites, Mayock, North Dakota. They simply did it by winning races. Redfoot, of course, continued to win when he went down south, first in the modifieds and then in the sporting cars. But in truth, he belongs to New England. And tonight, we justifiably, proudly, and with honor establish that. It is with a great deal of pleasure that I call Red's daughter forward to accept this honor. Susan Regis, I'm sorry, Susan, forgive me.
Thank you very much. My father wanted me to let everyone know that he is very honored, and he's sorry that he can't be here, but it is for health reasons that he couldn't be here. Thank you very much.
Put one of those up on the wall and one to take home. Photos with the plaque.
Peter. Susan, on behalf of the Mid-Atlantic Racers, this is a permanent membership card for your father. I hope you wear this jacket very proudly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, right this way. Okay,
No, that looks much better. Get the good looking at that.
Around these parts, they called him Redfoot the Leadfoot, and it's a pleasure to welcome him into the Hall of Fame. In an event that left a long mark on New England auto racing and may someday be commemorated on this stage, three fellows got together and formed a company named Ink Inc. and created a race that we know as the Spring Sizzler. Now, all three members are here today, and at great risk, they are all three presenters on today's program. Two of them you know very well. The other prefers to take his business acumen and keep it somewhat in the background. We've encouraged him into the spotlight today. You may know him as race driver Finch Fenton or a number of other aliases, but we know him as a good friend, Lou Boyd.
Thank you, Mike. You are right that at the end of the day, we are here about history. So why not just take a sec and come back with me for a moment in time? It's right after the Second War of the Worlds. The troops are back. The country's won. The mood is optimistic. Life is good. The karma's aggressive. Isn't it natural, then, that people at that point in time would go racing? First in the midgets, then the stock cars. In the southeastern corner of Near's territory, there was Kingston, Longsdale, Seekonk, Thompson. They were thriving. There was a race car in every other gas station. The drivers then, as Mike indicated, were typically swashbuckling kind of guys, very colorful, who didn't have to worry a lot about what their sponsors had to say. It was pretty wild stuff. Today, our job is to honor a person who typifies that region and that time, a person who distinguished himself beyond all others. And isn't it curious that we would end up picking a guy who was decidedly non-boisterous, a private man? But like Ollie Silva, this is a guy who did his talking with his victories. Hop Harrington began in the stock cars in the 40s. He racked up massive numbers of victories on the dirt. And how good was he? Legendary IndyCar engineer Jim McGee once said, after seeing the likes of Hop Harrington and Ralph Moody drive, I knew I never could. I had to concentrate on the cars. Hop evolved in parallel with the sport, from the midgets to jalopies to the infamous New England cutdowns. He strutted his stuff in the 50s, winning 13 of 15 shows at Seekonk, and finishing second in the other two, probably with some sort of side deal with Anthony. Even then, though, Hop's depth showed. Like Ollie, he was not just a driver, he was a chassis man, a fabricator, an engine builder par excellence. He was, in fact, an early Alan Kowicki, ready just to bust out of Rhode Island. And I agree with Peter that it was really the arrival of NASCAR at Norwood that allowed our New England stars to showcase their talent on a much broader scale, just as the Champ, Steady Eddie, and Red Foot were doing as the Eastern Bandits. Hop was ready. In 1963, with Roland and Butch Frizzetti and Red Hudson, he built an incredible number 74 coupe, a 4-bar car replete with Austin Healey disc brakes and power steering. He was pushing the envelope. It was arguably the dawn of Hop's finest hour. He won far and wide, racking his feature win totals into the hundreds. In the late 60s and 70s, as the Frizzettis began to back down a bit, so did Hop, but not without those golden moments, such as that great one in 1970 when Ray Hendrick was fogged in at Trenton and Hop jumped in Jack Tant's coupe and just annihilated the field. His virtuosity as a builder and fabricator actually served him quite well as his career did wind down. He built cars for Dick Armstrong, among the finest modifieds in the history of New England. And with Raleigh Lindblad, he built trick midgets, and you had to get some lead into them to get them up to 800 pounds. I'm told that when Hop was informed of his induction to the Near Hall of Fame, this private man could not quite believe it. But then I guess this guy, so used to self-sufficiency, simply hasn't changed all that much. When he was offered a plane ticket to fly up from Florida with Leo, he replied, "I'll drive. I'm not flying anywhere. If one of those damn engines screw up, I can't get out and fix it." Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to present to you the way it used to be, and to present to you one of the real threads of excellence in our racing legacy, Ralph Hop Harrington. And I'm going to have to tell you that unfortunately, due to some surgery last week, Hop is not able to make it today. And so we've asked former car owner Butch Frizzetti to come up, and longtime family associate Kevin Percy, who called Hop his second father. So if you two will come up, please. Formal near plaque, and secondly, something really nice that happened today. As probably all of our Hall of Famers did, Hop touched a lot of lives, and this came from our own Jeffrey Bodine, who says, "Hoppy, congratulations and thanks for helping me get to the big time. Your friend, Jeffrey Bodine."
That plaque was on the wall.
Butch, I'll have you hang that one up. And In the super-modified world of Nesmer, there were a couple of interchangeable heroes. And it seemed like every time I got to see the supers run and get a whiff of that methanol, if Ollie Silva didn't win, this other guy did. I guess it's only fitting that they both be inducted into this Hall of Fame on the same day. And to do the honors, I'll again call on Russ Conway.
Thanks, Mike. Back last spring, soon after the first Hall of Fame inductions, when NEAR sent out its criteria for 1999 Hall of Fame nominations, our selection immediately came to mind. I've been lucky to have 3 careers in my lifetime, but I can guarantee you I have never met anybody like Eddie West. And there may not be anybody like Eddie West again. Not only is he a genuine character, he is a down-to-earth, crafty, intelligent, self-made man whose true life story would drive a shrink to drink. He is truly a super-modified pioneer. My first memory of Eddie West was back at the Old Pine Speedway in Groveland. And Eddie was on the end of a connecting rod, about this long, about this round, and it had 5 knuckles on the end. He was standing on the top of a sandbank under a light between the 3rd and 4th turns, and somehow he had tangled locked wheels with the legendary Big Daddy Don McLaren. And that was the wrong thing to do in those days. Here's this skinny kid, number 61 junior, and McLaren, who weighed at the time about 260, and he looked like he was made out of chrome moly. And my memory of Eddie West was this silhouette underneath this light as the connecting rod of McLaren hit, and the silhouette dropped right out of sight, right off of this sandbank, and headed right toward the Merrimack River. You remember that, Westy? Look at him, he's turning red over there. It was the only time I ever saw Eddie West in a fight, for 2 reasons. He was far too smart for such nonsense, and secondly, he was just too fast to catch. It was 1961 when Eddie West first showed up on the New England racing scene at Hudson Speedway in an old flathead. They made him run with the Class A cars that day. We didn't know the rules, he'd say years later. We were stupid. We had a Ford with a straight front axle, straight axle. But it started snowing that Sunday afternoon in March, and guess what? Eddie West led the feature for the longest time. It was his very first feature race, and it was an omen of things to come. A bunch of young guys hanging around a little garage in Dunstable, Mass, put together his first super modified. There was this fire station next door, so what did they do? They used a frame off an old fire truck, cut out the middle, made roll bars out of black iron water pipe, body contoured out of sheet metal, and found a 383 Chevy engine. Engine 1 became 61 Junior. It was the second car of the year that they had, and appropriately enough, it was a Junior. The legacy of Eddie West was off to the races, just 20 years old, and oh, what a career he had. He won the Pines Season Championship in 1963, both the Pines and Hudson Season Championships in 1964. By 1965, the Supers were hot, and so was Eddie West. Frank Barthel built him a new Super in '65 with a 289 in Ford and Weber carburetors and those new 4-wheel disc brakes. Eddie had 17 feature wins that year, and he was a charter member with us in Nesmer. The 61 cars came and went. Ollie Silva and Don McLaren had a heck of a race going one day at Thompson. And they battled side by side for about 25 laps. But Westy knew better. He was about a half lap behind, and on the last lap, between the third and fourth turns, Ollie and McLaren rubbed wheels and nice and slowly came off the third turn into the infield. Needless to say, they don't have starters. They conked out, and Eddie West goes flying by. But what the crowd didn't know that day, as he comes off the fourth turn and he looks in the infield, he gave them all a wave. Said, "Thank you very much." "That's why you should never quit," he said afterwards. He ate more than one canary, I'll tell you. Eddie was a man of few words, but get a load of these numbers. He won more Nesmer season championships than anybody, 6. In 1969, 70, 73, 74, 75, and 80. He's the only one of only 2 drivers to ever win over 100 features. The Nesmer Classic Super Modified Biggie, he was a winner, a co-winner with Bob Cloutier and Don McLaren in 1966, in 1973 and 75. And when he wasn't winning, he was second in 70, 71, 72, and 74. Third in 80 and 82, fourth in 69, fifth in 68. Nobody ever had more top 5 finishes than Eddie West. He won the Thompson Icebreaker in 71 and 72, and he won the World Series 71 and 73. His feature wins came at Pines, Hudson, Arundel, Maine, Thompson, Loudon, New Hampshire, Briar, Westboro, Star, Riverglade, New Brunswick, Bathurst, New Brunswick, and Vero Beach, Florida. And he didn't make a lot of money. He did have one big payday once, $5,100, in a run what you run race at Hudson. Westy and Vic Miller put a starter in their super modified. That was the one rule we had. West won the first one, even though he could barely get into the car. Steering wasn't his problem. Getting in was. He could hardly walk because of terrible arthritis that had increasingly crippled him. After winning that first 25-lap feature and the cool $5,000 that went with it, West was helped from his car, hoisted up to the interview stand in Victory Lane, and I'll never forget what he promised the crowd. "If I win the second one of another potential $5,000, everybody's invited over to my house for a weenie roast." The place was packed. We had a barbecue, all right. With a lap to go in the second 25 lap, and he's leading, all hell broke loose. It was the scariest looking oil fire you ever saw in your life. The West engine blew up. Arthritis and all, he scrambled, hoisted himself out of the car, brushed his singed fire suit off, and when he got up into Victory Lane again, he says, "Well, I promised you all a weenie roast, except I didn't know it was going to be my weenie." Eddie pretty much owned his own cars along the way, but he'll be the first to tell you that a lot of people helped him. Yogi Fahey, who's here with us today, Frank Barthel, his son Brian Allegresso, Vic Miller, whom he drove for, Gary Drew, Buster Taylor, Dick Dokas, Mike Meza, and the list goes on. In 1973, all he did was race professionally. His livelihood came from racing, and I'd like to see anybody try to do that at the short track level today. Away from the track, he was responsible, mostly on his own in the later years, for raising 2 wonderful kids, Jody and Brian. He was sharp. Only once was he ever badly hurt in a race car, and he broke a leg in a modified in the last race of the season at Star in 1973. Another time, though, he got knocked out in a super modified, and when Buster Taylor showed up at the emergency room, he wanted to see how Eddie West was, and he says, "Well, I'm Eddie West's brother." And he goes in, and Wes looks at him and says, he ain't my brother. Immediately to which the doctors prescribed him with a concussion and kept him overnight. Except the next morning, they let him out because, as he said, they realized I wasn't insane. No, far from it. His final drive came at Oswego in 1986, but the legacy of a supermodified driving pioneer lives on. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to introduce you to one of the sharpest, cleanest on-track competitors in the history of New England racing, a real racer who treated thousands of race fans over the years to some extraordinary skill. A very deserving Hall of Famer. Please put your hands together one more time for Eddie West.
This is the worst. I just want to thank everybody that's helped me get in. It's a very fitting end. Thank you very much.
This is yours to take home. Permanent membership. Permanent membership card. Got a jacket here for you. You wear the jacket with pride. And this is your program, somewhere between number 1 and 8. There you go, Eddie.
Tasmanian devil, and that whirling dervish is just the way that Eddie West got around the racetrack. He was one of those smart up-country Yankees that used to make us Flatlander tourists think that he was a country bumpkin and had a great time doing it. But he's a great gentleman and a tremendous competitor. Our next presenter has been a racing scribe for the tabloids for about as long as there have been racing tabloids in New England. He's been a handicapper for Stafford and Waterford. He's been the unofficial biographer of our next inductee and constant trackside companion of our inductee's dad. He now plays and handicaps the stock market instead of race cars, and for reason unbeknownst to me, lets all of his readers in Speedway scene know how his favorite racing stocks are doing. Would you welcome Phil Smith?
Thank you, Mike. And judging from what I see, maybe they need some Lenny Bowlers, bungee cords, and baling wire over there. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Alfini and his group NEAR for the great thing that they're doing here to recognize some of the great drivers and individuals from years gone by. Also, last year when Stafford had their 50 greatest drivers of all time, they basically ignored New England. And it was the Arute family and Corey Pasacco at Stafford that recognized a lot of these people and gave them their just due. Well, anyway, most of you people know me, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Valasor for letting me be a part of his publication for the last 30 years, and Mike Joy always says I'm the only one that can write about old news and get away with it. But to be honest with you, I really enjoyed it because I lived a lot of it, and I don't want to see a lot of these names die. There were too many great people that should not be forgotten. Well, anyway, today we're here to honor one of the greatest, Freddie DeSaro. Freddie left us way too young when he was 41 years old. He was a close personal friend of mine. We traveled together for many years. And we had hoped that his widow wife, Linda, could have been here today to accept this. Well, she's had a few problems of her own. She's been remarried. Well, she sent this letter that I'm going to read. And it says, "Dear Al, please convey our thanks to all involved with Fred's nomination to the Hall of Fame. It's a wonderful honor and tribute to know that he made such an impression to be remembered so many years later. Fred enjoyed the competition and racing. He started racing hydroplane boats when he was in his teens, and no matter what he got involved in, he always had a way of turning it into some type of contest, whether it be bowling, skiing, sailing, checkers, you name it. He loved to compete. I received many letters from people stating how much they enjoyed watching him race. It's nice to be able to do what you love and in turn be giving so much enjoyment to others. Due to family illness, we couldn't be there to enjoy this honor with our good friends. I extend my congratulations to all the other nominees. He is certainly among some great company that had contributed so much to the sport of racing. I feel I have more than my share of great memories in the wonderful family of racing. Thank you again for still adding to these memories. With heartfelt thanks, Linda DeSaro Pilati." Freddie DeSaro was kind of a strange sort of character. He was very quiet, very recluse. He actually started in 1963 at Waterford. He wrecked 3 cars in 3 weeks. Needless to say, it wasn't a very good start. Well, he took a year off, and he went to driving go-karts. In go-karts, he excelled. He came back and he got tied up with a gentleman by the name of Robert Slim Ross, who owned a car they call a Bounty Hunter. He raced a part of the next year at Waterford, and then they decided to go to Norwood Arena, because Norwood Arena was the benchmark. That's where all the big guns were. Slater was the kingpin up there, so was Bugsy Stevens, Hop Harrington, and Leo Cleary. Needless to say, he ran the first year and just got his feet wet when he ended up wrecking Ross's car and he went out of business. Then he decided he was going to build his own. And in his backyard, him and his 2 brothers, Roger and George, and his father, Fred Sr., put together a 327 Chevrolet Sportsman. They went up to Norwood, and all of a sudden things started to click. He won the '67 Sportsman Championship up there. That's when sportsmen were very similar to what we call SKs now. He raced his own car through 1969. In doing so, he won the Bay State 200 at Norwood Arena. He won the Bottle 400 at Norwood Arena. Plus, he won a couple races at Thompson and at Stafford. But by the end of 1969, money was starting to creep into the sport, and he worked for a living, and he raced out of his pocket. He worked at Stanley Bostitch in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. Needless to say, he sold his car, and he still wanted to race. In the beginning of 1970, he got a call from Joe Brady. Joe Brady had a Mustang that Leo Cleary had driven the previous year and went through something like 4 motors in 5 days down in Martinsville. And Freddie says, I don't really want to drive. He called his car a toilet. He didn't really want to drive it, but he said, for the sake of nothing better, I'll drive it. Well, he went down to Martinsville with that thing, and he ended up finishing up near the front. He came back, and he started racing at Stafford and Thompson. And then when things got a little tight with Joe, Joe had to back off. Well, about the same time, Leo Cleary and Sonny Casella had somewhat of a unfriendly parting. So Casella needed a driver, and he picked Freddie. Freddie got into 15, and they started winning, and winning, and winning. Needless to say, he won the 1970 NASCAR National Modified Champion, which is something somebody from Rhode Island had never done before. That association lasted 1 year. The following year, after one race, him and Sonny Casella had a dispute. Well, just about the same time, I think Bugsy Stevens and Lenny Bolo were starting to go their own separate ways. Well, when the season opened up at Thompson in 1971, Bugsy was in the 15, and he was flying. Lenny's car was sitting in the pits at Thompson running, no driver. He never called Freddie, he just assumed he'd show up. Freddie wouldn't go to the races to watch, he was not a race fan. Well, the following week, Lenny called him. And that's when one of the biggest rivalries we've ever had here in modified racing in New England started. Freddie in the 3, Bugsy in the 15. And the funny part about it is many people in the grandstand thought there was such a tremendous rivalry that they hated each other. Actually, Bugsy and Freddie were the best of friends, and they remained that way until his untimely death. Throughout his career, he won races just about everywhere. He won back-to-back races at Martinsville. His biggest race came in the 1974 Trenton 200, which is a Race of Champions race. Who was with him throughout this whole time? None other than Bugsy Stevens. One of the greatest races ever seen. The two came off the 4th turn on the last lap, wheel to wheel, going down the front stretch of Trenton at about 150 miles an hour. And he got him by about a half a wheel. It was really amazing. Also, he had the Stafford 200 that he won. He had 4 track championships at Thompson. Needless to say, nobody knows what actually happened on October 8th of 1978. They were doing a warm-up at Thompson. He was thinking about getting out because he was up going through the food chain of the management at Bostage. They wanted him out because they invested so much money in him. Plus the fact Lenny was sick, and they decided after the end of the year, they were just going to sit out for a year and see what happened. Something happened, and he went over the bank that day, and needless to say, he suffered severe head injuries. He laid in the hospital for a month, and he passed away on November 1st of 1978. To me, it was a big personal loss, as it was to many, including his father. And I give his father a lot of credit because he continued to go because he loved the people. In fact, I regret that he's not here with us today because I think he would really enjoy this moment. So in the absence of Linda, I would like to call his very close friend to accept this, the oh so ever humble Carl Bugsy Stevens. On behalf of NEAR, I would like to present this to you because I think it's very fitting.
Believe me.
Safely.
Believe me. There's not much to say. There's not much to say. You did a good job, Phil. Freddie was a good friend of mine. Nobody knew that. They played a game that we were arch enemies. Ray Hendrick was the same way. Ronnie Bouchard the same way. George Summers. All the promoters do that. They think that we all hate each other, so they can get all the fans hating each one of us, and they fill the houses, and that was a good thing. But there's a bond between all the drivers that people don't know. Even you guys that are mechanics and so on, you don't know the bond that we have between us. And I can go between these chairs and tables, and it's unbelievable. With Freddie, you guys will never know, but I had Freddie in my hands when he died. That hurt. So this means a lot to me too. And I didn't really want to get up here and cry, but this kid here, I thought a lot of him. He never hell raised with anybody, but Freddie was a super guy. Thank you.
taking one of these. I'm going to send it to Linda. I'll send a special program to Linda, and I'll send a special card. Good. Thank you. No, no. Cool. There you go. Tough. That's tough.
You gotta love this guy. He's the best.
Linda on his way back to Florida.
Bugsy, I think you're right. There's no way a lot of us could ever share in that bond. But I think anybody who saw you and Freddie and Eddie and Leo and the way some of you fellows would go around Stafford and Thompson, less than an inch apart, without those big Nerf bars, but with those big open tires, and drive that track less than an inch apart, side by side, lap after lap after lap. I think everybody who had the pleasure to see that knew the trust that had to exist between you. And it was a pleasure to watch, believe me. You know, it's fitting that this Hall of Fame recognizes not only drivers and car owners, but race promoters and folks that fit into an altogether different category, those who make it possible to enjoy the efforts of those who race on Saturday nights and Fridays and Sunday afternoons. And that is kind of the category our next inductee fits into. Our next presenter, however, defies category. He is part of the triumvirate that invented the Spring Sizzler. He is the official uniform supplier to Lenny Bowler, who has never been seen wearing a shirt with his own name over the pocket. And who, in talking about the he's got such just a great grasp of the state of auto racing then and now. In one breath, between forkfuls of salad, he says, sure, we'd go Thursday night to Medford, Friday night to Norwood, Saturday night to Westboro, Sunday up to Arundel, Maine, and we go to West Peabody if they were running on Monday. And then he grabs for his cell phone and he goes, excuse me, it's my shock specialist. It's, you know, things are different now. He says, and we'd go to all those tracks with the same car. And today, boy, it's changed. He defies description, so I won't make further attempt. Would you please welcome Bruce Cohen?
Thank you, Mike. Honored guests, people of near. The next person that we're inducting is really unique. In today's world, we have Mr. Jeffrey Bodine, not Jeff anymore, has to be Jeffrey. He gets confused with that Jeff, what's that guy, Gordon or something like that, and Jeff Burton. I defy anyone in this room to argue this point. If you go coast to coast, Canada, east to west, north to south, into Canada, South America, and New Zealand, you mention the name Marvin, and everybody knows who it is. Marvin Rifchin, a unique individual. A more interesting note is that this will actually be Marvin's second Hall of Fame. A few years ago, he was inducted, along with Don Garlitz, into the Drag Racing Hall of Fame, and that also makes Marvin unique. Marvin started out as a young man going to the midget races. His father was in the tire and recapping garage business. He went to the midget races and became hooked on racing. He became a real bug. He started fooling around making midget recaps at the time, a bunch, some were made out in California, some down in Providence. Marvin came out with a better tire. In the early 50s, he was the first tire manufacturer. I believe it was 52 or 53. And I remember seeing the ads for Race Master and Speed Age every month. The first tire made as a new tire and not a recap for stock cars. In the late 50s, he came out with a new tire for drag racing. Marvin is truly a pioneer. I personally met Marvin, I hate to say it, but 40 years ago when I went to high school with his son Bobby. Marvin, once again, is unique. He's quiet, serene, but one of the most competitive people you'd ever want to meet. For many years, he drove his competitors, Goodyear and Firestone, absolutely crazy. They used to wonder how this little guy, a little business over in Watertown, Mass., right outside of Boston, could compete like he did. Marvin, as well as any of the noteworthy race car drivers in this organization, in this room, was a fierce competitor. Marvin liked to win. There were times in Marvin's career when Goodyear and Firestone made overtures to buy him out. He values his independence, and he said no. When most people in their 50s and early 60s are thinking about retirement, Marvin built from scratch his own tire plant to make his own tires in Gardner, Massachusetts. The plant is still going today. And I don't want to say that Marvin is in his 80s, but he told me the other week he's about 83. He goes to work every day, a 100-mile round trip, and he is as competitive as ever. Speaking as a car owner, Marvin was like a big father to me. I'd go over on a Saturday, try to con him out of a few tires for the dirt car, and he was very good about it. And he'd say, okay, do this, do that, change the spring, do this, do that. I'd come in sheepishly on Monday with the tires. He'd look at the tires and he'd say, you son of a, you didn't do what I told you to do. We all love Marvin. Some of us wanted to kill him some days, but he was a wonderful human being. He helped a lot of people out in their careers. When I was talking to Marvin the other week, he mentioned names like Frankie Schneider. He said, you know, Brucey, he said, you take guys like Leo and Hop and Freddie DeSaro and Bugsy and Bergen, Greco and those guys, they were real race car drivers. And then he said a few uncomplimentary things about some of today's people, and I agree with him. And I think most of us would. But Marvin is a hardcore racer. Marvin is like Frank Sinatra. He did it his way. He is still fiercely competitive, a wonderful human being, and just a great all-around guy. I think Marvin is probably one of the few people in this room who has touched everybody's life at one time or another. When I spoke to him last, I said, Marvin, when are you going to retire? He said, when they close the casket. He said, I'm a workaholic, I'm a raceaholic, and I like to tinker. I love what I'm doing, and as long as I can, I will keep going. I'd like to bring up a real racer, Mr. Marvin Rifkin.
Thank you, Bruce. It's been a long, long night. I would like to thank the nominating committee for the honor being given me tonight. But I have some apprehensions and some concern about all this. First of all, the New England antique racers. You know, I'm just not ready to be classified like that yet. About 68 years ago, I developed a real bad habit. I had a bug bite me. And that damn bug has been biting me ever since. And I'm still looking forward to the challenges that it has to offer. I was very fortunate in that in the New England area, I was able to become involved with stocks and modifieds after the heyday of the midgets, practically right from the beginning. I had the opportunity to work with an awful lot of talented racers. And you know, in those days, we were driving by the seat of our pants. We didn't know very much. We knew a little bit and tried to do the best we could. The tire problem there, oh boy. All we had were retreaded tires that were capped by the various tire manufacturers. And when I think of the number of times we bought the wall, it's a miracle that I'm still alive, let alone racing. But as progress and inroads came in, things got better. We raced all over the country. We raced in some foreign countries as well. And we had a lot of thrills. Speaking of thrills, I've had a few in my career. Oh, like the first time my car won a race. Maybe the first time it won a championship. How about one where you see your name in stone on a monument and you're still alive? Now that's a thrill. Not all the thrills have been pleasant. I can remember one race, the old Norwood Arena. 5,000 to win, I'll never forget it. The car had just taken the lead, 10 to go, and the right front failed. That wasn't pleasant. Neither were the participants. But we prevailed. New stuff came along, things got better, and I think we have a base today that racing has grown from. The only regret I have, I didn't buy any NASCAR stock. That was one bad mistake. But speaking of thrills, I think this is probably one of the more thrilling moments of my life. This gives me an opportunity to renew old friendships, old acquaintances with people I haven't seen in a long, long time. And to me, that's worth all of it. Thank you again for the honor. Thank you very much.
Go over that way, you'll put your plaque on. This is his plaque to keep. Yep. Here's a jacket. We hope you wear it proudly. Here's a jacket with your name on it. That's a Hall of Fame issue. Only 15 people so far have these jackets. And here's a private membership card. And then I'm going to draw one of these programs. One of them, number 1 to 8. This one. You'll get what numbers 1 through 8. I don't know which one you're going to get. Okay. Thank you.
Now, Marvin bemoans the fact that he didn't have any stock in NASCAR. Well, I kind of disagree, because I think Marvin held stock in a whole lot of little pieces of NASCAR. How many drivers out here didn't ask the tire man to carry them for at least a week, at least once a season? So he held just a little bit of paper on NASCAR drivers and on some of the sport's pretty greatest stars. So I think he had a pretty big piece of it. Our next presenter is a noted racing historian from Warwick, Rhode Island, who claims to have attended the very first race at Seekonk Speedway and still has the ticket stub to prove it, which I'm very happy to hear, because it proves that I'm not the only person in the room who never throws their racing stuff away. But Bob Sylvia has been the chronicler of Seekonk Speedway and things auto racing in New England since 1946. It's kind of funny. The genesis of auto racing is believed to be 1892. It was an 8-car race from Chicago to Evanston, Illinois, and back. 2 cars actually made it. Nobody bought tickets, so I wouldn't really call that fair. But in Narragansett, Rhode Island, that's where our sport really began, now 101 years ago. I guess it's kind of funny that Rhode Island is the only state in America without a racetrack. Well, it's funny to people outside New England, because those of us who are here know that Rhode Island doesn't need a racetrack, because they have a very fine one right next door. And to honor that facility, R.A. Bob Sylvia will make our next presentation.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure for me to be up here and present this next award. Before I get into that, I'd just like to mention, in case anyone didn't know, that this past Wednesday, Fred Estelle Sr. passed on. And Fred was a driver known primarily for his activities at Seekonk, but he did run at Westboro, Thompson, Norwood, and the famous old Lonsdale Arena. But now we'll get into my major chore here. Not a chore, it's a pleasure, sorry. I'd like to say the year of 1991 was not a good one for me, as I lost 3 major influences in my life that has evolved to my being an auto racing historian. In June of that year, my father died. He was the one who started me down this road. In September of 1945, the first race in Rhode Island after the wartime racing ban was lifted. Howard D. White, the Seekonk and elsewhere track photographer, in the 50s, he passed on in September. Ironically, Howard was fatally stricken while shooting his beloved midgets at Seekonk on what we had called his Return to the Track tour. Finally, in October, Dominic Anthony Vendetti left us. We in southeastern New England, as well as the rest of the country, had suffered a great loss. His story has been well chronicled since then, and there is little that I can add that hasn't been covered. Every known type of race car, short of Indy cars, has raced at Seekonk. He had boat races, animal races, both animals and some people say human animals. Auto polo and DAV always introduced new trends years before his competitors. His talents were nationally recognized as he was named the RPM Short Track Promoter of the Year in 1978. And his talents were not strictly limited to the auto racing arena, as he was a self-educated man in many fields, having built his own airplane, and he won a national award for his inventions and achievements in the refrigeration field in conjunction with the ice skating rink that was built in front of the Speedway. And let us not forget his unique chicken plucking device. Affectionately bestowed with the title of Godfather, we soon came to await his random late-night phone calls and his Vendettiisms sprinkled throughout conversations, such as what came first, the chicken or the egg. A question that Bruce Cohen and myself have debated for decades. Back a few years ago, it was kind of jokingly spoken right of acceptance among the media that you hadn't really arrived until you had been banned, always temporarily, from Seekonk, and or started to receive those late-night phone call wake-ups from Anthony. I'm honored to say that I eventually reached both plateaus. And in the banning incident, I must admit that I was in the wrong and Anthony was right. A godfather is defined as one who looks over, cares for, and guides children. D. Anthony truly fit that description in every way, with all of us as his children. He introduced auto racing to the Providence and southeastern Massachusetts area in 1946 and nurtured it through the good years and the lean years. I'd give anything to be awakened again one night and hear that distinctive voice launch into a rambling dissertation that would become crystal clear within the next day or so. And Bruce and I didn't collaborate on this, and I've got it written right down here. Maybe we get a discount for both using this, Bruce. But in the words of Frank Sinatra, Anthony did it his way. So it's my honor and pleasure to present this plaque adding D. Anthony Vendetti to the Near Hall of Fame, to the lovely Irene Vendetti and the Vendetti family.
It's really an honor to receive this special award. It's a very heartfelt award to receive from NEAR. They should be congratulated for the wonderful work they have done. It's hard for me to really express my feelings, but my husband died when we were married 51 years. He left me. He really hasn't left me. I feel he's always with me. But we both went through a lot together, and racing was the main topic in our lives. I want to thank my family for standing by me, and over the years, the hard work we've done to keep racing alive. And I want to thank all the friends, especially from Seekonk area, Seekonk Speedway, and all the friends here. I'm sure that they've been to Seekonk and know how much we love racing, and we try to present very good programs. All I can say is thank you very, very much.
I'd like to add one word, Mike. Barnyard Raceway in Rhode Island has been racing for the last, they told me, 18 years, very secretively. And myself and a few cohorts, we finally got there last Saturday after Thanksgiving. They ran a month ago when it was 20 degrees out. And if you could have missed the little pond in turn 4, everything's fine. There's a race scheduled today, and I don't doubt that they are not running there because they're a little crazy. But if anybody wants to know where it is, come and see me, and we'll tell them how to get there to keep the secrecy up. But Rhode Island has had a racetrack.
Doesn't that place sound a lot like Lakeville? Yeah. Francis, when's opening day?
First Sunday in May.
All right, first Sunday in May, Seekonk Speedway. Y'all got to be there. It's really great to see a business like a racetrack that, believe it or not, offers so little reward for such huge challenges and sacrifice, be a business that continues in a family for generations. And we certainly welcome that Francis and the Vedetti family continue to run the Cement Palace to the delight of fans every weekend. We have a couple other promoters that I spotted in the crowd just to recognize. Frank Farrar, the gang from Whip City Speedway in Westfield, is here tonight. And Terry Eames from Waterford Speedbowl. I saw working the crowd and selling tickets. I hope. I got to touch for a minute on the issue of secret speedways. Y'all know who Kenny Wallace is. He's the youngest of the 3 racing brothers from Missouri. Kenny bought a go-kart. Kenny has a big backyard. They started running the go-kart around the backyard up there near Charlotte Motor Speedway. And a couple of his friends brought their go-karts, and on Wednesday nights, a bunch of other people brought their go-karts, and the kids ran go-karts. And well, it stays light till about 9 o'clock in the summer on Wednesday nights, so then it gets dark, so they had lights put in. Then they put a fence up. Then one night they had about 3,000 people, and the police showed up. That was the end of Kenny Wallace Speedway. It had a very brief reign there. He still doesn't know how it all came to be, but I guess when he got the light bill, that was probably the end of that. Our next presenter has, well, he was an inspiration of mine because I used to read his columns in Stock Car Racing magazine, and that's where I learned a lot about what this great sport was and who its heroes were and how they came to be that. At that time, he was a college professor, and he managed to do what a few select folks in racing have been able to do, and that is make their hobby their life's work and have it still be their passion. He rose to editor of that publication, a position he still holds. He created a new magazine called Open Wheel. I'm not sure where the modifieds fit in one or the other, and that continues to go back and forth, but they're in stock car racing, I think, where they belong. And then I kind of dragged him kicking and screaming into a career in television, where he has become the lead pit reporter for CBS. I think the best fellow on pit road for any of the networks, and Buddy Baker's sidekick in the booth on TNN Winston Cup telecasts as well. He is also a pretty fair sprint car driver and modified shoe, and I believe he also edits the Garage Dog feature. So send pictures of your garage dog to Stock Car Racing Magazine to the attention of Dr. Dick Berggren.
And I will tell you, the Garage Dog feature is our most popular feature, and I think that says something about racing people, but I'm not quite sure what it says at this point. Maybe you can help us out later. It is so appropriate to honor and examine history, and particularly the people who have made that history. For without a knowledge of history, it would be very hard for any of us to understand where we are now, and thoroughly impossible to understand where we are going. I salute not just the drivers, Mr. Vendetti, Mr. Rifkin, who are in the audience. I salute all of you who took the trouble today on this nasty, rainy New England afternoon to drive the many miles that you drove to come here and honor these people and to partake in this bit of history that is happening today. When I think about Leo Cleary, I pretty much always also think about the national anthem. There is an analogy to be had there. When they play the national anthem, everyone stands up. When Leo Cleary got in a race car, after about lap 3, you could look around and everyone was standing up. And I suspect there are few people in this room who have not at some point in time or another stood to either cheer him or boo him or wonder how the hell he made that move work at all. Whether it was 3 wide on the outside, 3 wide in the middle, or 3 wide on the bottom, somehow he did that. But I wonder how many of you in this room also know that Leo Cleary was a terrific fabricator. Eddie Flemke came up with a front-end suspension system that bore his name for many years, and Leo took a look at that and said, if it works well in the front, I'm going to put it in the back as well. And thus was born the Cleary rear end, very similar to the Flemke front end. And those spectacular cars, the M2s that raced, Leo did the bodies on those things. Carry the body home, work on it, get it absolutely perfect, put it on the race car, and then go out and race the wheels off the car. At one point in time, the garage where Leo worked was so tight that they had to move the car around in order to work on it. If they wanted to work on the right side, they'd roll the garage door open, roll the car back, push it way over to the left side of the garage, and there was barely enough room to get in there and work on the race car. And Leo worked on it, and he drove it, and he won with it. And a few days ago, I called him and I said, gee, of all the places that you raced, of all the big events that you won, of all the cheering that people did for you, which was your favorite track? And with no hesitation whatsoever, he said Westboro. And with no hesitation whatsoever, he said, because you could pass there. And I think that's the most enduring memory I have, Leo, of your driving, is watching Leo pass cars. And is that not what this is all about, is passing cars? And God, did he do that and do it so well. One night at his favorite Westboro, he won in 2 separate divisions using 2 different cars. He cleaned house, the heat, the semi, the feature. It was a big night, and to have passed that many cars was a bigger night to Leo, perhaps, than having won some of the huge events at Stafford or Thompson or some of the other places where so many people came and watched him. If we had all night and some of tomorrow, I could perhaps go through the races that Leo Cleary won and the championships he won as well. Unfortunately, we don't have all night and we don't have all day tomorrow either, so I just suggest you take a look at your program, and there is a small bit of it in there. Certainly one of the reasons he won so often was that Leo Cleary was just a darn good race car driver. But he was also a finisher. It was so very rare that the race would end and Leo would be sitting in the infield or somehow or another in the pits. He knew how to make the race car go just fast enough to do exactly what he wanted with it, which was to pass everybody who was in front of it until he finally got into the lead. He raced for some of New England's best and most prestigious car owners. If a guy had a great race car, chances are at some point in time or another, he picked up his telephone and he called Leo and said, "Would you please run my race car?" You've already heard about several of them, but maybe we ought to point out that Roly Lindblad, at the very tail end of Leo Cleary's career, gave him a chance to extend it some more, and when you ask Leo about his favorite race cars, oh, he loved that Pro Stock he drove for Roly Lindblad. What a pretty car, and how well it really ran. Now 70 years old, Leo Cleary is still competitive. He's living in Florida, playing golf and trying to beat Georgie Summers and Gene Bergen and some of the same people he rubbed wheels with for so very many years on New England's racetracks. It is so appropriate and so fitting that tonight he is being inducted into the Near Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Leo. Come on up and get your plaque. Take the microphone. Talk about your crew.
Thank you. There's a lot of people in here that got me where I'm at. Number one, my wife passed away 22 months ago. And I never treated her right, but, you know, she stuck with me. But there's Joe Garria, Father John, he's a priest. Joe Brady. And there's always that Roly Lindblad. When everybody thought I was done, he says, "You just started, son, come on." So off we went, and I tell you, I sat in the best race cars that were ever made, and Roly Lindblad had a lot to do with it. Joe Brody and I, we went all over the place. You know, when I was a kid, my father, I got to X-rate this a little bit, a little add to this. My father told me when I was a kid, "Son, don't masturbate, you'll lose your hearing." Well, one of my crew members, 85 years old, he can't hear or see. So that'll tell you a lot about him. I want to thank everybody, because it took a lot of people to get me here. Thank you.
Dickie. Back, Leo. Bill. Get this going.
That one's yours.
Thank you. This is your program number card. This is one of the programs number 1 through 8. I hope you wear your back properly.
At great risk, I got a personal favorite little story on Leo Cleary that tells you what a hard competitor he is, and I've kind of asked him to relate it to those of you who haven't heard it.
You know, Stafford Springs, there was a bunch of competitors down there, and I'll tell you, it was tough. You know, like Eddie Flemke and Ronnie Bouchard, Bugsy. I was a tiger. I didn't care if there was $10 in the heat. I wanted to win it. I mean, I thought second sucked. So I still, and today it still does. I'll tell you, it still does. Georgie Summers and I played golf with Gene Burge and Georgie's brother, and boy, when you beat Burgeon for $2, you got a lot to be proud about. But I got to tell you about Stafford, you know, I wanted to win every race. So Bugsy and Freddie and especially Ronnie and Bugsy and Eddie Flemke, they'd see me coming by, trying to get by. They'd get side by side. They'd be slowing down. I see them look at each other. Here he's block. But I love them all. Thank you.
I got to tell you, Leo, it's not the first time I've heard those words by a champion race driver. I think it was the year Rusty Wallace won the Winston Cup Championship. Earnhardt finished second. We're there at the Waldorf. Here's this great big banquet room, and they're about to introduce Earnhardt. And I'm standing stage right with Earnhardt, and he's standing there. He's pacing back and forth, and he looked like he had indigestion. You know, and he's standing there waiting to go up on stage, and I go, Champ, are you okay? And he just kind of looks at me and goes, second place. Just like that, Leo. Just like that. Same words. Just nobody but me heard it. Okay? There was a bunch of us who grew up around Riverside Park, literally and figuratively, at least in the sport of auto racing. We all came in with a great deal of enthusiasm, and I'm glad to say some of us are still here, including our next presenter. About the third year that I announced at the park, I was just out of college, and the Springfield newspapers had an opening for their auto racing columnist. The auto racing columnist of the Springfield paper was a position created by Ed Carroll, who owned Riverside Park, to placate Ed so that there would be news of the racetrack in the paper that would help support the generous advertising budget that Riverside Park had with the newspaper. So I applied for the job, went up and met Carol Robbins, the executive editor, and gave him my credentials and a sample of my writing, and he said, we'll call you. And about 3 weeks later, I got a letter that said, thank you very much for your interest, but we have decided to hire a young gentleman by the name of Dean Nardi because of his special interest in journalism. And I got to tell you, at the time, the words kind of stung, but every time I pick up an issue of Trackside, I find that he was right. Here is the editor of Trackside magazine, Dean Nardi, for our next presentation.
Hello, y'all. There's been a tremendous amount of talented people that have been presented here today, and all very deserving. And I'm just glad that the NEAR board decided to save the best for last. That's how I feel about it anyway. It's just like having dessert after dinner. It's just the best part. And that's what it was like watching Billy Greco drive a race car. I came to realize that Billy Greco was something special back in the days. Now, I talk about back in the days of Riverside Park. People up here have spoken about how tough a place Stafford was, and Norwood, and on and on and on. But let me tell you, Riverside Park was about as tough as they come. There was 4 heats, there was 2 semis, there was a consi, there was a B consi, and maybe you got into the main and you started from the rear of a handicapped field, and it was tough racing. And the park was just a special place to be on Saturday nights for somebody growing up in the sport. It was a tough place. Drivers had their own sections in the grandstand. You had to keep them separated, and it was for a good reason, because it kind of cut down on the arrests and the hospitalizations. But Billy Greco, when he pulled that 43 out onto the track, whether it was for practice or for heat race or whatever, I mean, you knew just where the people stood. I mean, half of them would stand up and they'd be yelling and screaming and cheering just like the troops had come home from the war. And the other half, well, they were probably yelling some insults and throwing stuff, and it was just plain pandemonium. But I thought it was great. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it in my life. Probably never seen anything like that since. For years on a Saturday night, I never even had a date. You just couldn't miss Riverside Park. Billy Greco was the king of the Connecticut gang there, most of them had names ending in vowels. There's Cambino, Godiosi, Galulu, Centenaro, Carangelo, Toro, on and on and on. But when I got to be 16 years old and got to go down and visit a little bit with the drivers, I met Billy Greco. And in the years that followed, Billy took me places that I had dreamed about and read about in the pages of Illustrated Speedway News back when that was the only racing paper around. I mean, I saw him drive for the Garuti brothers and their famous cars at Stafford and Thompson. I traveled the All-Star League circuit with Billy and went to many tracks throughout the Northeast for years. I went to Trenton and Langhorne, some of the tracks in Jersey like Old Bridge and Rich Bedoin's 500. But most importantly, I guess, and the thing I know Billy best of all for, and I'm sure many of you do, is the red Meadow Flake Coupe number 43 he drove for his brother George. Well, it was a red Meadow Flake Coupe most of the time. One year, the car was better known as the Pink Panther, which there's a story behind that. And I guess George had decided that the car didn't show up that good on the racetrack, so he told the guy that was going to paint the car, well, we want to make it white this year. Well, that was all right. They got some white paint. Billy went into the garage the next night and heard that it was going to be white. And he says, that's not going to work. This car has always been red metal flake, and that's what it's going to be. Go get some red metal flake paint. So the guy who was going to paint the car didn't know what to do. He had the white paint in one hand, he had the red paint on the other. So that night he mixed the two of them together, sprayed the car, voila, pink. And there was the Pink Panther. I'm not shy about saying that Bill Greco was my hero as a driver, but he became more than that as I knew him longer and longer. It was obvious to anybody that he had exceptional talent as a racer, but he was also a genuine person, one who was always willing to help out a friend or family member in times of need. Billy drove truck for a living for many years. He might get home at 4 in the morning from driving truck and he'd get a call from somebody in distress, like the time one guy had a trailer come apart on the George Washington Bridge. That would be Mario Fiore and myself. Called to Billy Greco and he was right there to help. He was a little late getting here today, and I figured it was because somebody called and broke down on 91 someplace and Billy went to get him. I mean, the numbers detailing Billy's accomplishments are tremendous. There's the park championships, the fact that he won a race at every track hosting modifieds in the state of Connecticut, on and on and on. They're all written down in the program. But what I'd like to add to that is Billy Greco, as I know him, was and is a personable, unassuming, and wonderful guy. Some people later on in his career used to call him Gramps. I called him Dad because, in reality, in my youth, Billy Greco was like a second father to me. I was speaking with Ralph Solem the other day, another fellow that Billy has driven for, and I think he put it best. He said, Billy Greco never had a big head. He just left a big footprint on New England racing. In my mind, there was no one better in his prime than Billy Greco, and that's why we're honoring him here today. So, Bill, you are the best. Come on up here.
Billy, back up a little bit. Okay, Billy. Come on. Smile. Another one. I'm older. Got the other plaque. Dean, give him the other plaque. Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, as you come up after dinner and you have a look at these plaques, I want you to particularly note the headshot of Billy Greco.
Wear proudly. Here's your commemorative program, label number 128.
Thank you.
Thanks, Billy. Great job.
That work?
Mike.
Billy.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody. I really ain't a speaker or nothing, but there's so many people that I wanted to thank. All the owners that I drove for, different cars. My brother, George, was right here, and Richard Bedoin from the 500. The guys that worked on the car through the years. I just want to thank everybody, all my fans that stuck with me. And near. Every time I wave at Mike on television, he never waves back at me. My wife and my family that stuck by me. If I wasn't racing, I was working. I thought they knew where I was. Had a good times, a lot of good times. I could sit here, stand here all night and talk about different races and different things that I did or what I didn't do. All the competitors that I raced against, a lot of them are right here. I want to congratulate them all. Booker, especially. You want your wrench back? I'll get it anytime you want it. I think my brother still got it. I want to thank all the drivers that I raced against, too, that they backed off on me to let me win, you know, to let me get ahead of them. They used to put all our numbers on the wall, but they used to put the 43 in the dirt in the back. That's how far down I was all the time. Heats, semis, features, all dead last. Today, they start on the pole. I think they're trying to get the guy that's running last. But whatever, it's all over. I enjoyed it. I met the best people in the world in the racing business. Everybody treated me good, and I try to treat them just as good as they treated me. Thank you for everything.
Like Dean said, Billy was part of my coming of age in this sport. Went down to Billy's one night for dinner and had a great spaghetti dinner, and he showed me his proudest possessions. One was a uniform that was given him by Mario Andretti. They had met at a race, and Mario gave Billy one of his driving suits, which he cherished. And the other, I'm really especially glad, is on his plaque, because there's a shot of Billy wearing his helmet from the All-Star Racing League. Helmets that were only given to the designated 2 drivers from every speedway that were thought to be the best of the best to go out and represent their track in the All-Star Racing League. And that's what Billy's wearing in that photo. I think that's pretty neat. They, you know, you hear a lot about, you read in the papers, you see on TV about gangs and gang colors, and this thing about how gangs of kids will wear different jackets and things like that. This isn't new. Like Dean said, this was 1970 in the grandstand at Riverside Park Speedway. If you wore purple, you were from Waterbury. If you wore red, you were from New Haven. If the West Springfield group was up in Section 13. And it was pretty good. In fact, you didn't have to look at the track to see what was going on. All you had to do was listen to what part of the grandstand the commotion was coming from, where the fight was, and who was mad at who. God, it was fun. It was pretty neat. Billy was one of the first drivers I knew that had what you would now call a Gordon-esque reputation. Everybody in that place, 6,000 people on Saturday night, wanted one of 2 things to happen. They either wanted Billy Greco to win, or they wanted anybody else to win. It was that divided. It was few drivers achieve that kind of notoriety. Al has jackets for the gentlemen who are with us from our first Hall of Fame induction
Ronnie,
a
Rainey,
year ago.
Bugsy, well, Ollie's already got his, and I forgot.
So Bill Slater, Rainey Charland, Ronnie Bouchard, Bugsy Stevens, would you please come forward? And Rainey, only one.
I'll straighten out a little bit.
Oh,
Ronnie?
you guys want to pose for a picture, the four of you here? Now, let's see. Leo's going to take Gene Bergen's jacket back to Florida, and you want Al Rainey to give it to you to give to Leo? Yeah.
I don't think so. I'll give it to Leo. I think I'll have a better luck. Now can we bring up the current inductees to stand with them? Fine. Stay here. We're going to bring up.
And now could we bring up all of this year's inductees for a group photograph? Anybody who has a camera is welcome to come forward. Or you can rent one from Val LeSueur. Right here.
Thank you, Mike. It was a wonderful presentation. We thank you for doing all you have. All the presenters. It was a professional performance, what we always strive for. Thanks to the generosity of Dean Nardi and the trackside crew, there were quite a few magazines that were brought. Some people already have them, but we have some more we can pass out a little later. But we'd like to thank Dean for that.
Lou, Bergie, you bring the presenters up too as well?
Yes, certainly. Rosie.
Russ, Dean.
Russ. Russ Conway.
Russ Conway? He's out signing autographs? Okay. Come on, right up here in the back.
Dean? So Dean, mind up here with us? Really? Dean, want to get up here for Bill, background shot?
One more, guys. One more.
We need Dean and RA.
Hey, Mike, I know what's weird.
Hi, Nicholas.
Hey, Bud. Hey, Mother. You guys do too good. You must be all hobby. No.
Too bad, then we can.
Right up there in the middle.
Another good one. That's about it. Hi, pal. Hey. Why don't you wear the yarmulke? I was there in Daytona. I don't know, but I gotta make it down to your house. Yeah, we grew up.
All right, everybody, forward. One more.
Turn around.
Turn around. Look at the camera.
Names are.
Karen, plant them. That's right, short guys in the back. Come on over here, Russ. Get over front, Russ.